Our next speaker is Phoebe Smith from the Health and Safety Executive. And yeah, it's organisational culture, human factors, and learning organisations, because we need to learn when we get it wrong, or we need to learn when other people get it wrong as well. So Phoebe, over to you.
Morning, thank you. Morning, everybody. My name is Phoebe Smith. I'm from Health and Safety Executive Science Division, based in Buxton, which I'm guessing is snowy today, but I'm in Sheffield, which is also snowy. And thank you to Tanya and Patrick, because they've already covered some of the ground that I would like to cover, so that's excellent. I can focus on other things, and I will just pick up on some of the points that Tanya and Patrick have made and expand on those. Next slide, please. So just to trot you through what we're going to talk about over the next 10 or 15 minutes is thinking about the definition of safety culture and also health. As I said, I think Tanya and Patrick have done a really good grounding on that, so I'll not labour that. And I think what I'll do is move on and focus more on the high reliability organisations. And these are organisations that are more at the generative stage of the maturity model, and some of the characteristics that they display, and what we can learn from them, and what we can sort of emulate and decide that we want to emulate. And then I'm actually going to go back to basics as well and talk about some of the performance influencing factors. Tanya started talking about that, and I'll build on that and present some of the factors in a slightly different format. And then also slightly basic, but I think it's really important that we remember some of the basics is around human failure types. And when we're trying to learn and when we're investigating incidents, it's about really making sure that we understand what's gone wrong and why it's gone wrong, so that, as Tanya said and as Patrick said, we put in the right interventions so that resources and time is not wasted. And then I just want to think about the defence in depth as well. I'm sure this is a concept that you're all familiar with, but I think it's important that we revisit that. Next slide, please. Okay, as I said, I'm not going to labour this, because Tanya and Patrick have done a really good introduction. This is from the nuclear industry, and the reason I put it up is for the very reason that Tanya and Patrick have been talking about it, and the fact that quite often the system side of things is forgotten when it comes to safety culture, and organisations tend to focus on the sort of individual side of things. And as we'll see later, and as Tanya has started to talk about already, people sit within a system, and that system drives behaviour and drives attitudes as well. So it's really important to think about it holistically. Now, I know today is focusing very much on the safety side of things, but I think the principles that we are talking about today can also be applied to sort of health, and health tends to be the poor relation. So don't forget health, and this is why I've put it in brackets, because a lot that you'll be doing around safety can be easily transferred over into improving health. And of course, particularly with say something like work-related stress, this can have a real impact on error rates and therefore on safety as well. So it's worth again thinking about the holistic approach. Next slide, please. So if we build up, keep going, if we build up high reliability organisations, so if you're interested in reading about high reliability organisations, I've given you the reference at the bottom there. So high reliability organisations is a concept that was developed from organisations that are very dynamic, very high risk, very high consequence, yet have very low error rates. So things like operating nuclear power plants, landing aircraft on the back of ships, and then also wildfire fighting in North America. So high consequence and very dynamic. And these organisations, despite the fact that they are very dynamic and very high consequence, and nonetheless, the error rates are actually very low. And there are certain characteristics that you can see there that that encapsulate how these organisations operate. Now, I'm not going to go around all of them because there's an awful lot to cover there, but I'm just going to pick up on one or two of the elements. I think I'll go on to the next slide. So what we've got here, and Patrick's already picked up on this around safety culture. When we go into organisations, leaders are sometimes a little bit unrealistic in how quickly they can change safety culture, and this is a long-term commitment, and we were talking 2, 3, 4, 5, even longer. And quite often organisations go into this sort of all guns blazing, oh yeah, no, we want to change the culture, and the leaders are really committed to it, and then sort of in a year or 2 years down the line they go, well, haven't we done that now? Can we not tick that one off the list and move on to something else? So when we're talking to organisations about changing culture, we say to them just how important it is to get senior leaders on board so that they realise just what a commitment this is going to be in terms of time and in terms of pounds, shillings and pence as well. So there are certain characteristics. If we have the next slide. Thank you. There are. Oh, sorry. If you go back, it was just the red. That's it. Brilliant. So there are certain characteristics, as I said, within the high reliability organisations, and I think that senior leaders, as you can see from the ones that I've circled there, senior leaders can have a particular influence on some of these. So if we pick up on the mindful leadership to start off with, quite often leaders only want good news, or the middle managers only think that leaders want good news, and therefore everything is packaged in a good news story. And actually a characteristic of high reliability organisations is this bottom-up communication of bad news, and Tanya and Patrick have already talked about the importance of communication, and it is really important. And that actually also links in with, if you go to see sort of problem anticipation and preoccupation with failure. What preoccupation with failure means is that when all the KPIs are green and everything looks really sort of fine and dandy in terms of safety, actually what high reliability organisations do is sort of say, well, what could cause issues? What could go wrong? And actually let's change our KPIs to try and identify some of the more subtle indicators of the sort of latent failures that are sitting in our system that could eventually sort of bubble up and cause problems later on down the line. So this is where there's also this term chronic unease. Okay, everything looks good. As I said, all the KPIs are green, but actually what we're after is looking for that, really the needle in the haystack. Now this indicates just how resource intensive high reliability organisations are in terms of sort of their commitment to and their investment in health and safety culture. They are looking for those needles in a haystack. They are not looking for quick wins. They realise there's going to have to be a significant investment just to find those subtle cues. And going back to the Hudson model as an example, as Tanya pointed out, there are other models there, and the further up the maturity curve you are, you'll see that sort of as the flat line as you introduce, you don't have to put a great deal of investment in to actually get a good return on your investment, but as you go up the maturity model, the return on your investment becomes lower and lower because you're making smaller and smaller changes to your safety culture, and this is where it becomes more and more difficult to convince leaders, senior leaders, that they need to be continuing to invest in health and safety and to continue to make that high level of investment, even though it feels like there's only small returns, because actually those small returns are keeping organizations at that generative level. So just thinking about sort of senior leaders, I mean, I cannot emphasize the importance of having senior leader commitment. And it doesn't matter how much enthusiasm and excitement there is lower down the organization to changing health and safety culture. Without that senior leader commitment, things eventually will sort of fall over. I mean, I've talked about senior, I've used the word senior leaders, but as I've already mentioned, leaders are at different levels in the organization. So you've got sort of the chief executive and the senior leadership team. You've got sort of department heads or business unit heads, and then you've got the role of supervisors, and they are an overlooked group of leaders as well. And then you've got the peer leaders as well, and these are people that don't necessarily have any sort of formal management or leadership role or title, but nonetheless they're extremely influential amongst their peers, amongst the frontline workers, as to how people behave and how they think. So it's important to think about leaders at every level, not just senior leaders. And as you can see there, as I've said, to have a mature safety culture takes investment. And it's things like having those backup systems. It's very easy to say, well, we don't need a backup system. We're operating fine as we are. We haven't had an accident. And therefore, why do we need to invest in backup systems? It's almost something that you may never use, or may use, every 50 years, or, and I'm not being silly there. It could be used very, very infrequently. And people do wonder about why make that investment, and yet when it is used, it is absolutely critical and either helps to save the day and avoid an accident. Or another characteristic of high reliability organizations is if there is an incident, actually they're not crippled by it, they're not brought to their knees by it, they very quickly get back up and running and learn from that situation as well. So some of the other things that senior leaders need to be doing is making the time for training and competence. So often when you go into organisations and they've got fantastic training, it's just nobody can ever attend it because the staff are cut back to the absolute bone, and people are covering for holidays or sick leave, and therefore there isn't the time to go on the training. And there isn't this competence is a really important element of high reliability organizations. It's about building a resilient organization. This word resilience is a key term for HROs. And then having procedures. I think it was Patrick that was talking about procedures. And it's not just, as Patrick said, it's not just about having procedures for known events and known tasks. It's also thinking about what could go wrong and what procedures can we put in. Now, we might not nail those procedures in detail. We might only have some sort of boundaries, but nonetheless, even sort of slightly wide boundaried procedures can help people to make decisions in high emotion, dynamic situations. So it's, again, you may never use them, or you may use them only very infrequently. And there are always questions about, is this the right way to be spending money? Why are we spending money and time doing these procedures? But this is what high reliability organizations do. Just one of the other things before I move on to the next slide is around reluctance to simplify. This is around taking time and pausing. So humans and organizations behave and decide and think in very predictable ways. I mean, I know it sounds a bit odd to say an organization thinks, but it does. Organizations think in a collective way, behave in a collective way, make decisions in a collective way, and they are fairly predictable. And in a couple of slides time, I'll talk about that. And we all have, we go through life. When I say cutting corners, we could be absolutely overwhelmed with information. So the way that our brains have evolved is to sort of to simplify things, to be able to make decisions quickly, so that we're not flattened by information overload. And organizations do the same. You will know how your organization makes decisions. The most predictable way that an organization will respond to a situation. And usually 9 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, those tried and tested responses to a particular situation are absolutely appropriate and are the quickest, most efficient way of solving problems. But just from time to time, they are not appropriate for whatever reason. The situation might not be as an organization thinks it is, and therefore when a tried and tested solution is applied, it doesn't work. And so from time to time, it is worth just an organization stepping back, and then also giving individuals at the front line opportunity just to step back and say, is this a situation, is this problem as I've seen it before? Is the solution that I'm going to that I've tried before and is proven to be appropriate before, is it actually appropriate in this situation? So that's what reluctance to simplify is about. So it's this considering, are we doing the right thing in this situation? Brill, I could go on all day about it, but I am watching the time, so let's move on to the next slide. And then actually, Patrick has also talked about sort of worker involvement, and it's absolutely critical that workers at every level, so staff at the front line, are considered and consulted. And Patrick also talked about this the flexibility and the flexible culture and empowering staff to make decisions. And you can see there under containment of unexpected events, one of the characteristics of high reliability organisations is valuing technical expertise. So it's not necessarily making having decisions having to have decisions made by somebody at a particular grade. It's allowing the decisions to be made by those people that have got the best knowledge, the most technical and relevant knowledge, and they may sit further down the organisation or even another part of the organisations. So it's recognising that actually hierarchy and grade doesn't necessarily equate to technical expertise. What else do I want to talk about? Let's just pick up on the individual accountability. Tanya and Patrick have already mentioned individual accountability, and this is why sort of this no name, no blame culture that has sort of been the pendulum swing from blame culture through to no name, no blame culture is really not appropriate. We all have responsibility for our health and safety as an individual, and also to protect our colleagues. And the vast majority of us want to go into the workplace. We want to do a good job to the best of our ability, and we want to come home in healthy, and we want to come home in one piece as well, and we want all our colleagues to do that. So this individual accountability is really important, and yet also the organisation needs to accept that they provide the context, as Tanya has already introduced the idea, they provide the context in which that individual behaves and thinks and decides. And therefore, there has to be a balance between individual accountability and an organisation supporting individuals to behave to the standard that the organisation wants them to, and actually individuals also want to do as well. I am watching the time. Let us move on to the next slide. So Tanya's presented this already in a slightly different format, but it overlaps entirely. So Tanya was talking about the individual, the social, and the material, and we've just sort of we've got individual there, obviously clearly overlaps. We talk about organisation and job, but within organisation there is the social side, so senior leadership, and also there's the material side in terms of having the right procedures and those sorts of things. And then there's the job side that has the social, that is the peer social side of things, the first line supervisor social support side of things, and then also the materials, again making sure that the procedures are available at point of work, making sure that everybody's got the right equipment, that is well maintained and is appropriate to do the job as well. And then also we have put so in HSG 48 it talks about, that's free to download from HSC's website. So it talks about individual, organisation and job, and then we've put a wider one round. There's a fourth one round it, the wider context, because all organisations operate in a wider context, as you can see there. So there's the various laws, the industry standards, the public, you're very much sort of public facing, and then shareholders' expectations will drive how organisations make financial decisions, and that ripples through to how the job is done, and then how the individual can behave in a particular context. Right, let's move on. Time is running out. Lovely. So when we're talking about learning organisations, we still see organisations that it's better now. I mean, I've been in this game 30 years now, and organisations are thinking, they're not just handing the person that made the mistake their P45 now. They are actually thinking about the context that individuals are working in, and taking some responsibility for the decisions that are made. But I still think that organisations can do more to recognise. And actually, when we talk about learning organisations, please don't think about root cause in the singular. There are very, 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 very few incidents or accidents that has a single cause. There are multiple causes, and I know that it's messy. I absolutely appreciate that that's messy, and it would be much easier and much simpler to say, yeah, that's what caused it. We'll fix that, and everything will be great. It doesn't work like that. It's about looking at the multiple causes, seeing what's in your control, maybe pushing the boundaries a little bit about what's in your control, and then really dealing with some of those underlying issues, because in the next slide we'll see the defence in depth. But the other thing that organisations are still not really getting a grip on is this difference, is the different types of human failure. And this word violations is still seen as a really punitive, well, they violated the procedures, they didn't follow them, therefore it's their fault. And and actually violations are about individuals making decisions in the context that they're in, against the targets that they're set, with the equipment that they're using, in the social context that they're in. So violations are rarely individuals being mavericks and wanting to harm themselves or really doing anything destructive. Most of the time, decisions will be made given all the information. This is the best route. Now, it might not be the best route, but this is the information that the organisation is giving that individual, both directly and indirectly. These are the decisions that individuals this is the information that individuals are making decisions against. I'm running out of time, or I'm on time now, so move on to the next one. And then we've got the defence in depth. Please, when you're thinking about learning, think about your hierarchy or your lessons from your incident investigation. Think about hierarchy of control. I know it's more expensive to go up your hierarchy of control and try and remove some of the hazards. And in some situations, you can't remove hazards, or try and put in engineering controls. But don't go to the top soft ones, which is around training, competence, and procedures. And please put in some measures which will monitor whether those barriers and those defence mechanisms are effective and working, because that way you will see when these gaps are opening up, be able to respond before they all line up, and therefore hopefully avoid or certainly reduce the risk of incidents. I'm a minute over. Thank you ever so much for your time, and I'll be back later for Q&A.